3 bullets. 3 bullets was all it took to destroy everything Lucia Romano had spent 26 years building. Not the kind that tear through flesh and bone, but the kind that come in the form of a phone call at 2:47 in the morning, a doctor's trembling voice, and the words, "I'm sorry. We did everything we could." Her mother, the woman who had raised her alone after her father disappeared into the night 15 years ago. The woman who worked 3 jobs so Lucia could go to college. The woman whose hands were always rough, but whose heart was always soft, was gone. Just like that. A aneurysm, they said. Quick, they said. She didn't suffer, they said. But Lucia was suffering enough for both of them. If you want to discover how a single act of kindness from the city's most dangerous man transformed a broken woman into a queen, subscribe to the channel now. Leave a like if you believe that sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to this story from. Your presence here means everything. The rain fell like bullets on the plastic bus stop shelter, each drop exploding against the worn plexiglass with a violence that matched the storm raging inside Lucia's chest. It was 11:34 at night in the South Bronx, and the streets were empty except for the occasional car that passed by, its headlights cutting through the curtains of water before disappearing into the darkness. The bus she needed, the one that would take her to the funeral home, where her mother's body waited in cold storage because Lucia couldn't even afford a proper viewing, wasn't coming. It had stopped running an hour ago, but she sat there anyway, soaked to the bone in the same black dress she'd worn to sign the papers that officially made her an orphan, because she had nowhere else to go. The apartment she'd shared with her mother for 18 years, the tiny 2-bedroom in a building that should have been condemned decades ago, was too full of ghosts now. Her mother's reading glasses still sat on the kitchen table next to a half-finished crossword puzzle. Her slippers were still by the door. Her coffee mug, the one that said, "World's Best Mom," that Lucia had given her when she was 12, still sat in the sink because Lucia couldn't bring herself to wash it. Washing it felt like erasing her, like admitting she was really gone. So Lucia sat at a bus stop in the rain, crying so hard her whole body shook, because at least here, in this moment of complete surrender to grief, she didn't have to pretend to be strong. She didn't hear the car pull up, didn't notice the black Mercedes S-Class that slid to a stop at the curb like a predator approaching prey, its engine purring so quietly it was almost lost in the sound of rain. Didn't see the rear window roll down with mechanical precision, or the man inside who watched her with eyes the color of espresso, dark and intense and completely unreadable. She only looked up when a voice cut through the storm, deep and commanding, and carrying an accent that spoke of Italian heritage and old-world power. "You're going to catch pneumonia sitting there like that." Lucia's head snapped up, and through the blur of tears and rain, she saw him. Even in the darkness, even through the water streaming down the bus stop's dirty plastic walls, she could see that this was not an ordinary man. He wore a suit that probably cost more than she made in 6 months, charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes that caught the streetlight. His hair was dark, almost black, swept back from a face that looked like it had been carved from marble by an artist who understood both beauty and cruelty. There was a scar, thin and white, that ran along his left jawline, a reminder that this man's life had included violence. And his eyes, those impossibly dark eyes, were fixed on her with an intensity that made her forget, just for a second, how to breathe. "The buses stopped running," she heard herself say, her voice hoarse from crying. "I'm just waiting." "Waiting for what?" he asked. And there was something in his tone, a gentleness that seemed at odds with everything else about him, that made her want to tell him the truth. "I don't know," she whispered. and it was the most honest thing she'd said in 3 days. "I just don't want to go home." The man studied her for a long moment, and Lucia had the strange sensation of being seen, really seen, for the first time since her mother died. Not looked at, but seen. Like he could peer through the rain and the darkness and the walls she'd built around her grief and understand exactly what was breaking inside her chest. Then he did something she would never have expected. He opened the car door. "Get in," he said simply. Lucia should have said no, should have recognized the danger in accepting a ride from a stranger in a car that probably cost more than her entire neighborhood, in a part of the city where people disappeared and no one asked questions. Should have noticed the way the driver, visible now in the front seat, had the build of a man who knew how to hurt people, or the way there seemed to be another figure in the shadows of the car's interior. Should have been smart, been careful, been all the things her mother had taught her to be. But grief makes you reckless. Grief makes you stop caring about consequences. And there was something in this stranger's eyes, something that promised she wouldn't be hurt. At least, not in any way that mattered more than she was already hurting. So she stood, water streaming from her dress, creating puddles on the sidewalk, and walked to the car. The door was already open, held by the stranger's hand, and when she slid into the leather interior that smelled like expensive cologne, and rain, and something darker she couldn't quite name, she felt the warmth of the car's heating system wrap around her like an embrace. The door closed with a solid, final sound, sealing her inside this new world. "Where do you need to go?" he asked, settling back into his seat with the casual grace of a man who had never doubted his right to occupy space. "I don't know," she said again, because it was true. The funeral home wouldn't let her see her mother until she could pay the viewing fee. Her apartment was full of memories she couldn't face. She had no other family, no close friends who wouldn't judge her for falling apart. "Nowhere, everywhere, it doesn't matter." The stranger exchanged a look with his driver, something unspoken passing between them in the rearview mirror, and then he turned to her fully. In the soft glow of the car's interior lights, she could see him more clearly now. He was probably in his mid-30s, with the kind of face that would have been almost too beautiful if not for that scar and the hardness in his eyes that spoke of things seen and done that changed a person fundamentally. His hands resting on his knees were elegant but strong, with scarred knuckles that told their own stories. "Then let me take you somewhere warm," he said. "Somewhere you can dry off, where you can have something to eat, maybe something to drink. And if you want to tell me why you're crying at a bus stop at midnight in the rain, I'll listen. And if you don't want to talk at all, that's fine too. But you don't sit in the rain anymore tonight, not while I'm here to prevent it." There was something in the way he said it, a certainty that felt almost protective, that made Lucia's defenses crumble just a little bit more. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and the stranger gave a small signal to his driver. The car pulled away from the curb so smoothly she barely felt the movement, and they glided through the rain-soaked streets like ghosts. Lucia watched the familiar landmarks of her neighborhood pass by through the tinted windows, everything looking different from inside this cocoon of leather and warmth and quiet luxury. The bodega where her mother bought lottery tickets every Friday. The laundromat where they'd spent countless Sunday afternoons folding clothes and talking about everything and nothing. The park where Lucia had learned to ride a bike, her mother running beside her with hands ready to catch her if she fell. All of it blurring past, all of it part of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else now. "My name is Dante," the stranger said, breaking the silence that had settled over them like a blanket. "Dante Moretti." The name hit Lucia like a physical blow. Even in her grief-fogged state, even having spent the last 3 days in a haze of funeral arrangements and tears and sleepless nights, she recognized that name. Everyone in New York recognized that name. Dante Moretti, the man who controlled half the city's construction contracts, who owned restaurants and clubs and buildings that stretched from Manhattan to Queens. The man whose name appeared in the society pages at charity galas while simultaneously being whispered in back alleys as someone you didn't cross, didn't cheat, didn't even look at wrong if you valued your safety. The Moretti family had roots in New York that went back 3 generations, and while they'd cleaned up their public image over the years, everyone knew there was still darkness underneath the legitimate business empire. This was a man who made people disappear when they became problems. This was the Mafia boss of New York. And Lucia was sitting in his car, soaking wet and vulnerable, and completely at his mercy. She must have made some sound, some small noise of recognition or fear, because Dante's expression shifted slightly. Not quite a smile, but something that suggested he was used to this reaction, expected it even. "You know who I am," he said. It wasn't a question. "Does that frighten you?" Lucia considered lying, considered nodding and asking him to let her out, to go back to the bus stop and her grief and her safe, small life that had just been destroyed anyway. But there was something about the way he'd asked, about the way he'd offered her shelter without demanding anything in return, that made her tell the truth. "It should," she said quietly. "But I'm too tired to be afraid. I'm too sad to care about being scared." Something flickered in those dark eyes, something that looked almost like understanding. "Your mother," he said, and it wasn't a question either. Somehow, just by looking at her, he'd understood. "Recently?" "3 days ago," Lucia whispered, and saying it out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. 3 days. 72 hours since her entire world had collapsed. An aneurysm. She was at work, and she just collapsed. And by the time they got her to the hospital, there was nothing they could do. She was only 53. She was supposed to have years left. We were supposed to have years left. The words came tumbling out now, a dam breaking, and she couldn't stop them even if she wanted to. She told this dangerous stranger things she hadn't told anyone else, about how her mother had worked herself to exhaustion to give Lucia a better life, about the college fund that had been emptied to pay for her father's gambling debts before he disappeared, leaving them with nothing, about how her mother had smiled through it all, had never complained, had somehow found joy in the smallest things, even when they were eating rice and beans for the 3rd night in a row. About how Lucia had just finished her master's degree in social work and had been planning to finally start paying her mother back, start taking care of her the way she'd been taken care of. About how she'd had plans, dreams, a whole future mapped out where her mother got to stop working 3 jobs and start living. And now all of it was gone, erased in a single moment of divine cruelty. "And now I can't even afford to give her a proper funeral," Lucia finished, her voice breaking on the last word. "They're keeping her at the funeral home, but they want $5,000 just for the viewing, and I don't have it. I have $1,700 in my bank account, and my rent is due in a week, and I just started my job at the community center, so I haven't even gotten my first paycheck yet, and I can't even give my mother the dignity of letting people say goodbye to her properly." The silence that followed was heavy, but not uncomfortable. Dante had listened to every word without interrupting, without offering empty platitudes, without looking away from her, even when she was crying so hard she could barely speak. Now he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a phone, sleek and expensive, and made a call. When he spoke, it was in rapid Italian, too fast for Lucia to follow with her basic high school understanding of the language. But she caught a few words. Funeral home. 5,000. Tomorrow. When he hung up, he turned back to her with an expression that was impossible to read. "It's handled," he said simply. Lucia blinked, rain-soaked and tear-stained, and not quite able to process what he'd just said. "What's handled?" "Your mother's funeral, the viewing, the service, the burial, all of it. It will be taken care of." The words didn't make sense. Couldn't make sense. "I don't understand. I can't accept that. I can't pay you back." "I'm not asking you to pay me back," Dante said, and there was something in his voice now, something gentle but firm. "Consider it a gift, from one person who understands loss to another." "But why?" Lucia asked, her voice barely a whisper. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Why would you do this?" Dante was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant, looking at something she couldn't see. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old pain. "Because 10 years ago I sat in a hospital room and watched my wife die. Cancer. We'd been married for 3 years, known each other since we were kids, and I had all the money in the world, but it couldn't save her. And in those final weeks, when I was drowning in grief and anger and helplessness, someone showed me a kindness I didn't deserve. Someone I barely knew paid for a specialist to come from Switzerland, not because it would save her, we all knew it wouldn't, but because it gave us 3 more weeks together. 3 more weeks where she wasn't in pain, where we could talk and hold hands and say all the things we needed to say. That kindness, that gift from a stranger, it didn't heal the loss, but it made it bearable. It made it survivable." Lucia stared at him, this man who the world saw as dangerous, ruthless, untouchable, and saw the grief that mirrored her own, saw the scars that loss had left on his soul, the same way it was leaving scars on hers. And in that moment, sitting in his car while the rain continued to fall outside, something shifted between them. Some invisible wall came down, some connection formed that neither of them had been looking for, but both desperately needed. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "About your wife?" Dante nodded, accepting her condolences with the grace of someone who'd heard them 1,000 times, but still appreciated the sentiment. "Her name was Isabella. She was a teacher, 2nd grade. She loved children, wanted a whole house full of them someday. We never got that chance." The car had stopped moving, Lucia realized. She'd been so focused on Dante, on his words and his story, and the unexpected vulnerability in his eyes, that she hadn't noticed they'd arrived somewhere. Through the rain-streaked window, she could see they were in front of a restaurant, small and elegant, with warm light spilling from its windows onto the wet sidewalk. The sign above the door read, "Bella Luna," in gold script. "This is my place," Dante said, following her gaze. It was Isabella's favorite. She loved the carbonara here. Said it reminded her of the trip we took to Rome for our honeymoon. After she died, I bought it. The owner was retiring anyway, and I couldn't stand the thought of it closing, of losing that connection to her. Now I come here when I need to remember, when I need to feel close to her again." He opened his door and came around to her side, producing an umbrella from somewhere and holding it over both of them as he helped her out of the car. His hand was warm around hers, steady and strong, and Lucia found herself leaning into his presence without quite meaning to. They hurried through the rain to the restaurant's entrance, where a man in his 60s with kind eyes and a chef's coat stood waiting. "Buonasera, Dante," the man said warmly. Then his gaze shifted to Lucia with concern. "Madonna?" She soaked through. Come inside. I'll have Rosa bring some towels." Inside, the restaurant was exactly as warm and inviting as it had looked from outside. Dark wood paneling, soft lighting from wall sconces, the smell of garlic and tomatoes and fresh bread filling the air. It was late, well past normal closing time, but the chef, who Dante introduced as Marco, didn't seem to mind. He fussed over Lucia like she was his own daughter, bringing thick towels and insisting she sit by the fireplace in the private dining room at the back. "You'll catch your death," Marco muttered in heavily accented English, draping a blanket around her shoulders. "Dante, what were you thinking? Letting this beautiful girl sit in the rain? You have no sense sometimes, even if you are the boss." There was affection in the scolding, and Dante took it with good grace, even managing a small smile. "I found her at a bus stop, Marco. I didn't put her there." "Well, you brought her here, so now she's our responsibility. I'll make the carbonara. And the tiramisu. And maybe some minestrone first, to warm her up." Marco bustled off to his kitchen, still muttering in Italian, and Dante settled into the chair across from Lucia. Without the rain and the car, and the darkness between them, she could see him even more clearly now. He was devastating, she realized. Not just handsome, but compelling in a way that made it hard to look away. There was power in the way he held himself, but also a deep weariness that she recognized, because she carried it too. They were both so tired, tired of pretending to be strong, tired of carrying their grief alone, tired of the weight of a world that kept demanding they move forward, when all they wanted to do was stop and remember and feel. "Tell me about her," Dante said quietly. "Your mother. What was her name?" And so Lucia did. As Marco brought food that she barely tasted, but somehow managed to eat anyway, as the fire crackled and warmed her slowly from the outside in, she told him. About Rosa Romano, who had come to America from Italy when she was 19, with nothing but a suitcase and a dream. About how she'd met Lucia's father at a dance hall in Little Italy, and believed him when he said he'd build them a life worth living. About how she'd worked as a seamstress, a house cleaner, a cook at a diner, sometimes all three in the same day, and never once complained. About her laugh, which was loud and uninhibited and could fill an entire room. About her hands, always busy, always creating something. Sewing, cooking, knitting, always making beauty out of nothing. About how she'd taught Lucia that kindness cost nothing but was worth everything, that hard work was its own reward, that love was something you showed through actions more than words. "She sounds remarkable," Dante said, when Lucia finally ran out of words. "She sounds like the kind of woman the world needed more of." "She was," Lucia whispered, and the tears came again, but gentler now, quieter. Dante reached across the table and took her hand in his, and the gesture was so natural, so right, that she didn't even think to pull away. They sat like that for a long time, hands joined across the table, while the fire burned low, and Marco eventually brought out the tiramisu he'd promised, setting it down quietly and disappearing back to his kitchen without a word. "I should go," Lucia finally said, though she made no move to actually leave. "It's late. You've already done so much. I don't want to impose." "You're not imposing," Dante said firmly, "and you're not going anywhere. Not tonight. Not back to an empty apartment full of memories you're not ready to face yet. Upstairs, there's the apartment. Small, but comfortable. It was Isabella's studio, the place she'd go when she needed space to think, or read, or just be alone. I keep it exactly as she left it. You'll stay there tonight and tomorrow, when you're rested and dry, and have had time to breathe. We'll figure out the rest." Lucia should have argued, should have insisted she could take care of herself, that she didn't need charity from a man she'd just met, no matter how kind he was being. But the truth was, she was exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. She was soul-weary, grief-heavy, and the thought of going back to that apartment where her mother's ghost waited in every corner was more than she could bear. So she nodded and let Dante lead her upstairs to a small apartment that smelled faintly of lavender and old books. The space was simple but beautiful, filled with plants that someone clearly still watered and cared for. Walls lined with bookshelves, a comfortable bed, covered in a handmade quilt that looked like it had been stitched with love. "The bathroom is through there," Dante said, pointing to a door on the left. "There should be clean clothes in the dresser. Isabella was about your size. Take whatever you need. And if you need anything else, anything at all, I'll be downstairs in my office. Just come find me." He turned to leave, but Lucia's voice stopped him at the door. "Dante?" He looked back at her, those dark eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart skip. "Thank you. For everything. For stopping. For listening. For not letting me sit in the rain anymore. I don't know why you did all this for a stranger, but thank you." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, sad and beautiful and full of understanding. "You're not a stranger, Lucia. Not anymore. And sometimes the people who save us are the ones we least expect. Sleep now. Tomorrow we'll make sure your mother gets the goodbye she deserves." Lucia slept dreamlessly for the first time in 3 days, cocooned in Isabella's bed, with lavender-scented sheets and the distant sound of rain finally slowing to a gentle patter against the windows. When she woke, pale morning light was filtering through white curtains, and for a single, blessed moment, she forgot. Forgot about the phone call, the hospital, the terrible finality of death. Then memory crashed back like a wave, and she sat up, gasping, tears already streaming down her face before she was fully conscious. But this time, the grief didn't drown her completely. This time, there was something else threaded through it. The memory of kind eyes watching her across a table, strong hands holding hers while she cried, a voice promising that she wouldn't have to face this alone. Dante Moretti had walked into her life at her lowest moment and offered her something she hadn't expected to find. Hope. Not the kind that erased the pain, but the kind that made it survivable. She found clothes in the dresser exactly where he'd said they'd be. Simple things. A soft cotton dress in deep blue, a cardigan that smelled faintly of that same lavender scent that permeated the whole apartment. They fit perfectly, and as Lucia looked at herself in the mirror, she felt almost like herself again. Not the broken woman from the bus stop, but someone stronger. Someone who could face what came next. Downstairs, she found Marco already in the kitchen, the smell of espresso and fresh bread filling the air. He beamed when he saw her, immediately pressing a cappuccino into her hands and a cornetto onto a plate. "You look better," he said approvingly. "Sleep helped, yes. It always does. And Dante, he said to tell you he'll be back soon. He had some business to attend to this morning, but he left instructions." "Instructions?" Lucia asked, sipping the cappuccino and nearly moaning at how good it was. She'd been living on bad diner coffee for so long she'd forgotten what the real thing tasted like. Marco's eyes twinkled with something that looked like mischief. "For your mother's funeral. He wants everything perfect. The flowers, the music, the service. He's arranging it all. That man, when he decides to do something, he does it right. Just like with Isabella's service. That was the most beautiful funeral I've ever seen. And I've been to many. Every detail perfect, because he loved her that much." The mention of Isabella made Lucia's chest tighten. "He must have loved her very much," she said softly. "He did," Marco agreed, his expression growing somber. "But it destroyed him when she died. For 2 years, he was like a ghost himself, going through the motions, running his businesses. But there was no life in his eyes. No joy. We all worried he would never come back from that dark place. And then, slowly, he started to heal. Started to remember that Isabella would have wanted him to live, not just survive. But he's never looked at another woman. Not once. Not until last night." Lucia's heart skipped. What do you mean? Marco studied her with eyes that were far too knowing. The way he looked at you, the way he held your hand, the way he brought you here, to this place that was Isabella's favorite, to the apartment where she used to hide away when the world was too much. He doesn't bring people here, Lucia. This restaurant, yes, it's open to the public. But upstairs, that's sacred, that's personal. And yet he brought you there without hesitation. That means something. Before Lucia could process what Marco was suggesting, the restaurant's front door opened, and Dante walked in. He was dressed differently than last night, in dark slacks and a white shirt, with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms that were surprisingly muscular and marked with a few more scars. His hair was slightly damp, as if he'd just showered, and when his eyes found Lucia sitting at the small table by the window, his entire expression softened. "You're awake," he said, crossing to her with long, purposeful strides. "Did you sleep?" "I did," Lucia said, standing because sitting felt wrong somehow when he was looking at her like that. "Better than I have in days. Thank you. For the room. For everything." "It was nothing," Dante said. But the way he said it made it clear it was anything but nothing. "I've taken care of the arrangements for your mother. The funeral home will be ready for the viewing tomorrow evening. The service will be the day after at St. Anthony's, if that's acceptable to you. I know it's quick, but I thought you'd want to say goodbye sooner rather than later." Lucia felt tears prick her eyes again, but they were different this time. Not the desperate, drowning tears of the bus stop, but tears of gratitude, of relief, of overwhelming emotion that someone cared enough to do this for her. "It's perfect," she managed. "St. Anthony's was her church. She went every Sunday, even when she was exhausted from working all week. How did you know?" "I asked around," Dante said simply. "Your neighborhood. People remember Rosa Romano. The woman who always had a kind word, who would bring food to sick neighbors, who never turned anyone away who needed help. She was loved, Lucia, and she'll be remembered properly." The weight of his kindness was almost too much to bear. "I don't know how to thank you," Lucia whispered. "I don't know how to repay this." Dante reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the same gesture he'd made in the car last night, and Lucia felt electricity shoot through her entire body at the simple touch. "You don't repay kindness," he said softly. "You pass it on. When you're ready, when you've healed enough, you'll find someone else who's sitting in the rain with nowhere to go, and you'll stop for them. That's how it works." They stood there, close enough that Lucia could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtle, with notes of cedar and citrus, close enough that she could see the exact moment his pupils dilated as he looked at her. There was something building between them, something intense and inevitable and completely unexpected. Attraction, yes, but more than that. Recognition. Like two souls that had been searching for something they didn't know they needed until they found it in each other. "Dante," she started, not sure what she was going to say, only knowing she needed to acknowledge what was happening. But he shook his head gently, stepping back as if he needed the physical distance to maintain control. "You're grieving," he said, and there was regret in his voice, "and I won't take advantage of that. What you're feeling right now, the gratitude, the connection, it's real, but it's also complicated by everything you're going through. So we'll take this slow. We'll get through your mother's funeral. We'll make sure you're okay. And then, if you still want to explore whatever this is between us, we'll do it the right way." His words should have been a relief, a sign of respect and restraint. Instead, they made Lucia want to grab his shirt and pull him back, to tell him that yes, she was grieving, but she also knew her own mind, that the connection she felt wasn't born from gratitude or vulnerability, but from something deeper, something that had sparked to life the moment their eyes met in the rain. But he was right. They barely knew each other. And grief did strange things to people, made them reach for anchors in the storm, even if those anchors weren't solid. So she nodded, accepting his wisdom, even as everything in her protested against the distance he was putting between them. "Okay," she said quietly. "We'll do it your way." The next 2 days passed in a blur of activity that kept Lucia from drowning in her sorrow. Dante was there for all of it, a constant, steady presence that somehow never felt suffocating. He drove her to the funeral home to approve the arrangements, stood silently beside her while she looked at her mother's face for the last time, held her hand when she needed support, and gave her space when she needed to be alone. He seemed to understand instinctively what she needed before she knew herself, and that understanding felt like its own kind of miracle. The viewing was everything Lucia could have hoped for, and more. The funeral home was filled with flowers, roses and lilies, and her mother's favorite carnations, arranged in sprays and wreaths that transformed the space into a garden. There was music, soft and beautiful, Italian hymns that Rosa had loved. And people came. So many people. Neighbors from the building, regulars from the diner where her mother had worked, parents of children from the community center where Lucia had just started her job, even people Lucia didn't recognize who came up to her with tears in their eyes and stories about how Rosa had helped them, had been kind when kindness was desperately needed. "Your mother gave my daughter her communion dress," one woman said, clutching Lucia's hands. "We couldn't afford one, and Rosa showed up at our apartment with this beautiful white dress she'd made herself. Said she couldn't stand the thought of any little girl missing her special day because of money. She sat with my father when he was dying," another man told her. "Every day for 2 weeks, she'd come after her shift and read to him in Italian, the old stories from the villages back home. He died peaceful because of her." Story after story, memory after memory, and Lucia realized that her mother's legacy was far greater than she'd understood. Rosa Romano hadn't just worked 3 jobs and raised a daughter. She'd touched countless lives, had made the world better through small acts of kindness that had rippled outward in ways she'd never know. And through it all, Dante was there. Not hovering, not demanding attention, just present. A solid, silent support that made everything more bearable. Lucia caught him several times talking quietly to people, making sure everyone had what they needed, that the catering was handled, that there were enough chairs for the elderly visitors. He moved through the crowd with easy authority, and people deferred to him instinctively, though Lucia suspected most of them didn't know who he really was. They just recognized power when they saw it. Late in the evening, when the last visitors had finally left, and Lucia stood alone in front of her mother's casket, Dante approached quietly. "You should go home," he said gently. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be harder." "I'm not ready," Lucia whispered, unable to tear her eyes away from her mother's peaceful face. "I'm not ready to say goodbye." "You never will be," Dante said, and there was such understanding in his voice that Lucia knew he was speaking from experience. No amount of time is ever enough when you love someone. But you don't have to do this alone. I'll be here tomorrow, and the day after that, and every day after, if you need me. Lucia turned to look at him, this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known to pray. "Why?" she asked, the question that had been burning in her chest since that first night. "Why are you doing all this? Being so kind, so patient, so present? You barely know me." Dante was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her face, as if memorizing every detail. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough with emotion. Because when I saw you sitting at that bus stop, crying in the rain like your heart was breaking, I saw myself 10 years ago. I saw the man I was when Isabella died, when I thought I'd never feel anything again except pain. And I remembered what it felt like to be that lost, that alone, that certain that the world had ended, and there was no point in going on. And I thought, if I can stop one person from feeling that way, if I can be for you what that stranger was for me all those years ago, then maybe Isabella's death and all that pain will have meant something. Maybe I can take this terrible experience we've both had and turn it into something good. He reached up and cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. But that's not the whole truth anymore, Lucia. That might be why I stopped that first night. But it's not why I'm still here. I'm still here because when I look at you, I feel something I thought died with Isabella. I feel alive again, awake, like the world has color again instead of just being shades of gray. And I know the timing is terrible. I know you're grieving, and I should keep my distance, but I can't help it. You've gotten under my skin in a way I never expected. Lucia's breath caught in her throat. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. Every rational thought in her head was screaming that this was too fast, too intense, too complicated. But her heart, her battered, broken heart that had just lost the person who meant most to her in the world, was singing a different song. It was telling her that this man, this dangerous, powerful, impossibly kind man, was exactly what she needed. Not to replace her mother's love, but to remind her that there was still life to be lived, still joy to be found, still reasons to keep going. I feel it too, she whispered. This connection. It terrifies me because I don't understand it, because it seems impossible that something good could come out of so much pain. But it's real. I know it's real. Dante's eyes darkened with an intensity that made her shiver. After the funeral, tomorrow, he said, his voice rough. After we've laid your mother to rest and you've had time to grieve properly, I want to take you to dinner. A real dinner. Not just comfort food in my restaurant. I want to court you properly, the way you deserve. I want to know everything about you. Your dreams, your fears, your favorite books and the songs that make you cry, and what you wanted to be when you were a little girl. I want all of it, Lucia, if you'll give it to me. Yes, Lucia breathed, not needing to think about it, not needing to weigh pros and cons or worry about what was sensible. For once in her life, she was just going to feel, just going to follow her heart wherever it led. Yes, I'll give you everything. The funeral the next day was beautiful in the way that only celebrations of a life well lived can be. The church was packed, every pew filled with people whose lives Rosa Romano had touched. Father Michael, who had known her mother for 20 years, spoke about her kindness, her faith, her unwavering dedication to making the world a little bit better. He talked about how she'd volunteered to cook for church events, even when she was exhausted, how she'd tutored immigrant children in English on her days off, how she'd never turned away anyone who came to her door, hungry or cold or in need. Lucia sat in the front pew with Dante beside her, his hand holding hers, his presence a steady anchor, while waves of grief washed over her again and again. She cried through the entire service, but they weren't the desperate, drowning tears of that first night. They were tears of love, of gratitude for having had such an incredible woman as her mother, of sorrow that their time together had been cut short, but also of peace, knowing that her mother had lived a life of purpose and meaning. At the cemetery, as they lowered her mother's casket into the ground, Lucia felt something shift inside her. The acute, stabbing pain of fresh grief began to transform into something else. Not acceptance, Not yet, but the beginning of understanding that she would survive this. That her mother's death didn't have to be the end of Lucia's story, but could instead be a turning point. A moment where she chose to honor Rosa's memory by living the kind of life her mother had always wanted for her, a life filled with love and purpose and joy. As the last prayer was said, and people began to drift away, offering final condolences and hugs, Dante pulled Lucia aside. "There's something I want to show you," he said quietly, "if you're up for it." Lucia nodded, trusting him completely now. He led her to a spot under a large oak tree, about 20 yards from where her mother had been laid to rest. There, nestled in the grass, was a simple granite bench with a bronze plaque. Lucia leaned closer to read the inscription, and her breath caught. "In memory of Rosa Romano, a woman who taught us that kindness costs nothing but is worth everything. May all who rest here be inspired by her example." "When did you?" Lucia couldn't finish the sentence, overwhelmed by the gesture. "I ordered it the day after we met," Dante admitted. "I know it might seem presumptuous, but after hearing you talk about her, after seeing how many lives she touched, I wanted there to be something permanent. Something that would remind people for generations to come that a woman like your mother existed and made a difference." Lucia turned to him with tears streaming down her face, but this time they were tears of gratitude, of overwhelming emotion that someone could see her mother's value so clearly and choose to honor it in such a beautiful way. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. For stopping that night, for being here, for giving my mother the funeral she deserved, for this." She gestured to the bench. "For seeing me when I felt invisible." Dante pulled her into his arms, holding her close while she cried against his chest. "You could never be invisible, Lucia," he murmured into her hair. "Not to me. Not anymore." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other under the oak tree while the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that Rosa would have loved. And Lucia felt, for the first time since that terrible phone call, that maybe she was going to be okay. That maybe, somehow, she would find a way to carry her grief and still live fully. That maybe her mother's death had brought her something unexpected. Love. A week later, Lucia found herself standing in front of her mirror, getting ready for her first real date with Dante. The apartment still held ghosts, her mother's presence lingering in every corner. But Lucia had started the slow process of sorting through belongings, keeping the precious memories, and letting go of the rest. It hurt. Every moment of it hurt. But it was also healing in a strange way. A way of honoring her mother by not letting the apartment become a shrine to grief. She'd chosen a simple black dress, elegant but not flashy, with a neckline that was modest, but showed enough to be interesting. Her mother's pearl earrings, the ones Rosa had brought with her from Italy all those years ago, hung from her ears. And around her neck, she wore a small silver cross that had been her first communion gift. Looking at herself in the mirror, Lucia barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked older somehow, marked by grief, but also by something else. Strength, maybe, or resilience, or perhaps just the knowledge that she'd survived the worst thing she could imagine and was still standing. When Dante arrived to pick her up, his expression when he saw her made her feel beautiful in a way she'd never experienced before. Not just physically attractive, but seen, valued, cherished. He was dressed impeccably as always, in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than she made in 3 months. But there was something different about him tonight, too. A nervousness, almost, as if this mattered to him, in a way that business meetings and deals and all his usual activities didn't. "You look stunning," he said, offering her his arm with old-world courtesy. "Absolutely stunning." The restaurant he took her to was not Bella Luna, but something else entirely. A small French bistro in the West Village, intimate and romantic, with candlelight and soft music, and a menu that made Lucia's head spin with options she'd only ever read about. They ordered wine that tasted like poetry, appetizers that were small works of art, and talked. God, how they talked. Dante asked about her childhood, and Lucia found herself telling him stories she hadn't thought about in years, about learning to sew beside her mother, fingers pricked with needles, but hearts full of laughter. About the way Rosa would sing Italian lullabies when Lucia couldn't sleep, her voice not particularly good, but filled with so much love it didn't matter. About dreams of becoming a social worker so she could help people the way her mother had helped people, giving back to a community that had given them so much. "What about your father?" Dante asked gently. "You mentioned he left, but I don't want to pry if it's painful." Lucia took a sip of wine, considering how much to share. But there was something about Dante that made her want to be honest, to show him all of herself, even the ugly parts. "He was a gambler," she said finally. "Cards, mostly, but also horses, sports, anything he could bet on. My mother loved him desperately, believed he would change, kept giving him second chances even when he'd emptied our bank account, or pawned her jewelry, or borrowed money from dangerous people. When I was 11, he disappeared one night owing money to the wrong people. We never heard from him again. For years, I thought he was dead. Then, when I was in college, I saw him, just walking down the street in Atlantic City like he didn't have a care in the world. He saw me too, and I watched him turn around and walk the other way." The pain in her voice must have shown on her face, because Dante reached across the table and took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "You deserved better. Your mother deserved better." "She did," Lucia agreed. "But she never complained, never spoke badly about him even though he'd destroyed us financially and broken her heart. She just worked harder, loved me more fiercely, and somehow found a way to be happy anyway. I think that's what I admired most about her, her ability to find joy even when life was cruel." Dante nodded, understanding in his eyes. Isabella was like that too. Even when the cancer was eating her alive, even when she was in so much pain she couldn't sleep, she'd find something to smile about. A bird outside the window, a joke in a book, the way the light came through the curtains in the morning. She taught me that happiness is a choice, not a circumstance. They shared their grief like bread, breaking it between them, and somehow that sharing made it lighter, more bearable. And as the evening wore on, the conversation shifted from pain to possibility. Dante told her about his plans to expand his charitable work, to use his wealth and influence to fund community programs in underserved neighborhoods, about a scholarship fund he wanted to create in Isabella's name for students pursuing teaching degrees, about his dream of building affordable housing that didn't look like projects, but like real homes where families could thrive. Lucia told him about her new job at the community center, about the kids she worked with, who reminded her so much of herself at their age. Hungry for opportunities, desperate to escape the cycle of poverty, needing someone to believe in them. About her idea for a mentorship program pairing at-risk youth with successful professionals who could show them different paths. "I could help with that," Dante said, and there was excitement in his voice. "I know people, successful people from all industries who would volunteer their time if asked. We could make it real, Lucia. We could actually build something that changes lives." The "we" hung in the air between them, heavy with promise and possibility. Not just I or you, but we. Together. A partnership. A future. After dinner, Dante didn't take her home. Instead, he drove to the Brooklyn Bridge, parking in a quiet spot where they could walk along the pedestrian path. The city sprawled around them in every direction, millions of lights creating a galaxy of human ambition and dreams. They walked slowly, not touching, except for his hand, at the small of her back, a gentle pressure that felt both protective and possessive. "Tell me what you're thinking," Dante said after they'd walked in comfortable silence for several minutes. Lucia stopped, turning to face him with the bridge lights haloing his dark hair, making him look almost otherworldly in his beauty. "I'm thinking that 3 weeks ago, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd lost everything that mattered, and there was no point in going on. And now, I'm standing here with you, and I feel like maybe my life is just beginning. That maybe all that pain was leading me to this moment, to you. And it terrifies me, because it seems impossible that anything real could come from so much loss." Dante stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "What we have is real," he said, his voice low and intense. "I know it's fast. I know the circumstances are complicated. But what I feel for you is the realest thing I've experienced in 10 years. When I'm with you, I remember what it feels like to want to wake up in the morning, to have something to look forward to beyond just getting through another day. You've given me back something I thought I'd lost forever." "What's that?" Lucia whispered, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. "Hope," Dante said simply. "The belief that there's still good in the world, that there's still love to be found even after devastating loss, that there's still a reason to build a future instead of just surviving in the present." He cupped her face in his hands, those scarred, elegant hands that had held so much power but touched her with such gentleness. "I'm falling for you, Lucia Romano. I'm falling hard and fast and completely. And I know I should probably slow down, should give you more time to grieve, should be more rational about this. But I can't. I don't want to. Life is too short and too uncertain to waste time pretending I don't feel what I feel." Lucia's breath caught in her chest. Everything in her life had been ripped away so suddenly, so completely, that she'd forgotten what it felt like to gain something instead of lose. But here was this man, this impossibly complicated, dangerous, beautiful man, offering her something precious, his heart, his hope, his future. "I'm falling for you too," she admitted, the words tumbling out before she could second-guess them. "And it scares me because I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to grieve my mother and fall in love at the same time. I don't know how to hold on to the past while reaching for the future. I don't know how to be both broken and whole." "Then we'll figure it out together," Dante said, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "We'll take it one day at a time. Some days you'll need to cry, and I'll hold you while you do. Some days you'll need to be alone with your memories, and I'll give you space. Some days you'll need to laugh and remember what joy feels like, and I'll be there for that too. There's no rule book for this, Lucia. No right way to grieve or to heal, or to fall in love after loss. We just do our best, and trust that it'll be enough." And then he kissed her. Soft at first, gentle, giving her every opportunity to pull away if she wanted. But Lucia didn't want to pull away. She wanted to dive in, to drown in this feeling, to let herself be consumed by something other than grief for the first time in weeks. So she kissed him back, threading her fingers through his hair, pressing herself against him, and feeling truly alive for the first time since her mother died. The kiss deepened, becoming something urgent and desperate and full of all the emotion they'd been holding back. Dante's arms came around her, pulling her so close she could feel his heartbeat against her chest, and Lucia gave herself over to it completely. To this moment, to this man, to this unexpected salvation that had come to her in the form of a stranger stopping at a bus stop in the rain. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Dante rested his forehead against hers. "Come home with me," he said, his voice rough with desire and something deeper. "Not for anything you're not ready for. Just to be together. To talk more, or not talk at all. To hold each other. To not be alone." Lucia knew what she should say. Knew that the sensible thing would be to go slow, to maintain boundaries, to not rush into anything physical when her emotions were still so raw. But sensible had never gotten her anywhere. Sensible hadn't saved her mother. Sensible hadn't prepared her for devastating loss. And sensible certainly wasn't going to help her find happiness again. So instead, she said, "Yes, take me home." Dante's penthouse was everything Lucia had imagined and nothing she'd expected. Yes, it was luxurious, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of Manhattan, with furniture that was clearly expensive, and art on the walls that probably cost more than her entire childhood home. But it was also warm, lived in, filled with books and photographs and small personal touches that made it feel like a home rather than a showpiece. There were pictures of Isabella everywhere, and rather than feeling intrusive or uncomfortable, Lucia found it touching. This was a man who honored his past, who didn't try to erase the woman he'd loved just because she was gone. That spoke to a depth of character that made Lucia trust him even more. "Tell me about her," Lucia said, picking up a photograph of a beautiful woman with long dark hair and a smile that could light up a room. "Tell me about Isabella." Dante came to stand beside her, looking at the photo with an expression of bittersweet nostalgia. "She was light," he said simply. "Pure light in a world that had shown me mostly darkness. I grew up in this life, Lucia. My father, my grandfather, they were men who built empires on fear and violence. I learned young that kindness was weakness, that showing emotion made you vulnerable, that love was a liability. And then I met Isabella at a charity gala when I was 25, and she looked at me like I was worth saving." He took the photo from Lucia's hands, studying it, as if seeing it for the first time. She was a teacher at an elementary school in Queens, had no idea who I was, didn't care about my money or my family name. She cared about the kids she taught, about making the world better, one small act at a time. And somehow, impossibly, she decided I was worth her time, worth her love. She saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. "What was that?" Lucia asked softly. "The possibility that I could be better than my bloodline, that I could use my power and resources for good instead of just accumulation and control. She challenged me to be more, to do more, to care about things beyond profit margins and territory. And I tried, for her. Started cleaning up the family business, investing in legitimate ventures, using my influence to help instead of harm. But it was never enough time. We had 7 years together, 3 of them married, and then she was gone." He set the photo back down carefully, his jaw tight with old pain. "For a long time after she died, I thought that was it. That I'd had my chance at happiness and lost it, and I'd spend the rest of my life just going through the motions. I threw myself into work, into building the empire bigger and bigger, because if I stopped moving, if I let myself feel, it would destroy me. And then I saw you crying at that bus stop, and something shifted." Lucia reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I'm not her," she said gently. "I can't be her, and I won't try to replace what you had." "I don't want you to be her," Dante said fiercely, turning to face Lucia fully. "What I had with Isabella was beautiful and real, and it shaped me into who I am. But it's in the past. And you, Lucia, you're my present. Possibly my future, if you'll have me. You're not a replacement or a consolation prize. You're something entirely new, entirely your own, and I'm falling for exactly who you are." He pulled her closer, one hand coming up to cup her face. "You're strong where she was gentle. You're fierce where she was soft. You fight the world where she tried to heal it. And I need that strength right now. I need someone who understands loss, who's been broken and is choosing to put herself back together. Someone who knows that life is fragile and precious and shouldn't be wasted on pretending or playing it safe." Lucia felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of being seen, of being chosen, not in spite of her brokenness, but because of it. "I need you too," she whispered. "I need someone who won't treat me like I'm fragile, who won't walk on eggshells around my grief, who understands that I can miss my mother and still want to live, still want to feel, still want to love." Dante's eyes darkened with intensity. "Then love me, Lucia. Love me with all your broken pieces, and your fierce heart, and your stubborn refusal to give up even when the world has tried to destroy you. Love me the way I'm already loving you, completely and recklessly, and without reservation." And then he was kissing her again, deeper this time, more demanding. His hands moved from her face to her waist, pulling her against him until there was no space left between them. Lucia's fingers tangled in his hair as she kissed him back with all the pent-up emotion of the last 3 weeks, all the grief and pain and desperate need to feel something other than loss. Dante walked her backward toward the bedroom, never breaking the kiss, and Lucia went willingly. When they reached the bed, he pulled back just enough to look at her, his breathing ragged. "Are you sure?" he asked, giving her one last chance to change her mind. "We don't have to do anything you're not ready for." But Lucia had never been more sure of anything in her life. "I'm sure," she said, reaching up to begin unbuttoning his shirt. "I'm sure because life is short and unpredictable, and I've learned the hard way that tomorrow isn't guaranteed. I'm sure because when I'm with you, I feel alive again. And I'm sure because I'm choosing this, choosing you, choosing to let myself feel joy even in the middle of grief." Dante caught her hands, stilling them. "I need you to know something first," he said seriously. "I need you to understand that if we do this, if we take this step, it means something to me. This isn't just physical. This isn't me trying to forget Isabella, or you trying to escape your pain. This is me choosing to build something real with you, something that honors both our pasts while creating a new future." "I know," Lucia whispered. "I know, and I'm choosing it anyway. I'm choosing you." That was all the permission Dante needed. He kissed her again, and this time there was no hesitation, no holding back. They came together with an intensity born of shared loss and unexpected connection, 2 broken people finding wholeness in each other's arms. Dante was gentle but passionate, reverent but hungry, treating Lucia's body like something precious that he was being trusted with. And Lucia, who had never felt particularly beautiful or desirable, felt like a goddess under his touch. Every kiss, every caress, every whispered word of praise and desire made her feel valued in a way she'd never experienced. When they finally came together completely, Lucia felt something inside her chest unlock. Some part of herself that had been frozen since her mother's death began to thaw, to warm, to remember what it felt like to be fully alive. Tears streamed down her face, but they were tears of release, of healing, of overwhelming emotion that was equal parts grief and joy and gratitude that she'd survived long enough to feel this. "I've got you," Dante murmured, holding her close, moving with her in a rhythm that felt ancient and perfect. "I've got you, and I'm not letting go." Afterward, They lay tangled together in Dante's massive bed, Lucia's head on his chest, while his fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. The city lights painted patterns on the ceiling, and for the first time in weeks, Lucia felt at peace. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of something strong enough to hold the pain alongside joy. "What are you thinking?" Dante asked softly, his voice rumbling in his chest under her ear. Lucia considered lying, considered saying something light and meaningless. But they'd promised honesty, promised to show each other their real selves, so she told the truth. "I'm thinking that my mother would have liked you. She always said I should find a man who was kind above everything else, who treated me with respect, who made me feel safe. You're all of those things, even though you're also dangerous and complicated, and probably not at all what she imagined for me." Dante's chest moved with quiet laughter. "No, probably not. Most mothers don't dream of their daughters ending up with men like me. But you're also everything she taught me to value," Lucia continued, lifting her head to look at him. "You're loyal. You honor your commitments. You use your power to help people instead of hurt them. You stopped for a stranger crying at a bus stop and changed her entire life. That's the kind of man my mother would have respected, regardless of your family history or your business dealings." Dante's expression grew serious. "I want you to know something, Lucia. The life I lead, the world I come from, it's not without risk. There are people who would see you as a weakness, as leverage to use against me. There are dangers that come with being close to me, complications that you didn't sign up for. If we're going to do this, really do this, you need to understand what you're getting into." Lucia had known this conversation was coming, had known from the moment she learned his name that choosing Dante Moretti meant choosing a complicated, potentially dangerous life. But she'd also learned in the hardest way possible that safety was an illusion. Her mother had lived a good, careful life and still died suddenly at 53. There were no guarantees, no way to protect yourself from heartbreak or loss. So you might as well choose love when you find it. "I understand," she said firmly. "And I'm choosing this anyway. I'm choosing you, knowing exactly who you are and what that means. Because the alternative is going back to a life that's safe but empty. And I'd rather have complicated and real than simple and hollow." Dante pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "Then we'll figure it out together. I'll keep you as safe as I can. I'll be honest with you about the risks. And we'll build something strong enough to withstand whatever comes." They talked through the night, sharing stories and dreams and fears, as the city slowly quieted around them. Dante told her about his plans to fully legitimize the family business within the next 5 years, to use his influence and connections to help other families transition out of the criminal enterprises that had defined them for generations. Lucia told him about her dream of opening her own community center one day, a place that combined social services with education and mentorship, giving kids like her the resources they needed to break cycles of poverty. "We could do it together," Dante said, as dawn began to paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "Your vision, my resources. A partnership." "A partnership," Lucia echoed, liking the sound of it. "In business and in life. In everything," Dante agreed, pulling her into another kiss. The next 6 months were a whirlwind of change and growth for both of them. Lucia threw herself into her work at the community center while simultaneously beginning to plan her own organization with Dante's support. They spent every evening together, sometimes at his penthouse, sometimes at her apartment, which she'd slowly transformed from a shrine to her mother into a home that honored Rosa's memory while still looking forward. Dante was true to his word about keeping her safe. She met his inner circle, the men who protected him, and managed his various enterprises, and they accepted her with a respect that told her Dante had made it clear she was important. She learned the subtle signs of when he was dealing with something dangerous, the tension in his shoulders or the clipped tone in his voice that meant someone had crossed a line. And she learned to trust that he would handle it, that he would keep her insulated from the worst of his world while still being honest about its existence. They visited her mother's grave together every Sunday, Dante standing quietly beside her while she talked to the headstone, sharing news and asking for guidance, and slowly coming to terms with the loss. The bench he'd had installed became a meeting place for them, a spot where they could sit and talk about their days and their dreams and the life they were building together. "I miss her every day," Lucia told him one sunny afternoon, 6 months almost to the day after her mother's death. "But it's different now. The grief doesn't consume me anymore. It's just part of who I am, part of my story. And I think she'd be happy about that. Happy that I'm living instead of just surviving." "She would be," Dante agreed. "And she'd be proud of everything you're accomplishing. The mentorship program you've started has already helped dozens of kids. You're carrying on her legacy of kindness and service." Lucia leaned into him, comfortable and content, in a way she never thought she'd feel again. "We're carrying it on," she corrected. "This is our legacy now. Together." That evening, Dante took her back to Bella Luna, the restaurant where he'd first given her shelter and warmth on that terrible rainy night. Marco greeted them with his usual enthusiasm, fussing over Lucia like she was his own daughter, insisting they try his new recipe for osso buco. They ate and laughed and talked, and for a moment, Lucia felt like they were just a normal couple enjoying a normal dinner. No complicated histories, no grief, no danger. Just two people in love. After dinner, as Marco brought out tiramisu and espresso, Dante grew quiet. There was a nervousness to him that Lucia had never seen before, an energy that made her pulse quicken with anticipation. "Lucia," he began, reaching across the table to take her hand. "These past 6 months with you have been the best of my life. Even with all the complications, all the grief we've both been processing, all the challenges we've faced, you've made me believe in second chances. You've made me believe that it's possible to honor the past while still building a future. You've made me believe in love again." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, and Lucia's breath caught. "I'm not asking you to forget your mother, or to replace what you had with her. I'm asking you to build something new with me, to take all the love she taught you to give and share it with me for the rest of our lives. Lucia Romano, will you marry me?" Through tears of joy, Lucia whispered, "Yes." And in that moment, sitting in Isabella's favorite restaurant with her mother's memory blessing them from beyond, two broken hearts became whole again. Together,